Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the Xs and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the Xs and Argos pregame walkthrough brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB, and we are here to get you set for the Toronto Argonauts season opener against the BC Lions this coming Sunday at BMO Field, 7 o'clock. We got a huge show for you. It's almost too big a show. We'll see what we can do to try and squeeze this into our normal listening time so we don't lose all of you. But there's a lot of stuff to talk about. We've got to go through final roster cuts. There were some surprises for sure. We're going to talk about roster concerns at this point. I think there are some roster concerns as well. There was news on Chad Kelly today, which we'll get to. Plus, we're going to go over our Argos offensive and defensive MVPs, who we think they'll be this season. TSN put out their top 50 players. We'll just look through who they picked as Argos and who they missed maybe as well. Plus, we've got all of our regular bells and whistles, Pick 6, OCDC, One Thing, predictions, Put Me Down for 20, and our CFL picks. All that more is coming up on this episode of the Xs and Argos podcast. JB, before we get into the heart of our program today, we want to talk about Something in the Water Brewing. There's so much to talk about with them, but I'll give you the highlights. So first of all, maybe the most exciting is that Longboat is back out and available at Something in the Water. They've got it on tap. They've got it available for purchase. If you want to go and pick up a 2-4 of Longboat, get down to Something in the Water in Liberty Village. Longboat Pale Ale is the beer that was made and dedicated to fans of the Double Blue. And if you haven't seen it before, you've got their mascot there wearing the blue football helmet, their X's and O's all over the can. This was inspired by the Argos and dedicated to Argos fans. The other thing is we've got a ticket giveaway that happens tomorrow. We're recording late Tuesday night. Wednesday, tomorrow, we are going to draw for our ticket giveaway. And so if you haven't yet entered into the ticket giveaway, Something in the Water Brewing is giving away their seats for this Sunday's game. All you got to do is get onto Twitter or X. Make sure you're a follower of the @Xs and Argos account. And all you have to do is retweet the tweet that says, retweet this to win the tickets. And we'll do the draw tomorrow night. Plus, the last thing that I've got to tell you about is we are going to be down there Sunday, game day, at about 4 o'clock. Come by, say hi, and enjoy one of the great beers that Something in the Water has got for you, and then wander on over to BMO Field to enjoy the BC Lions Toronto Argonauts game. Something in the Water is in Liberty Village. Couldn't be closer to BMO Field. All right, JB, let's get things going here. So, roster cuts. I guess when I first saw this list, I've processed it more now, but I was really surprised at one name in particular, and that's Tavares McFadden. I wouldn't have necessarily predicted all the other names either, but that's the one that really stood out for me. And especially because I thought, well, if Tavares McFadden does get cut, I thought it would be because of Chris Steele, the really impressive player from USC who had a really good camp, but he got cut too. And so it was a tough one in terms of, did we see this coming? Like, kind of. We did talk about it, but it just didn't seem that likely. Would you have kept Tavares McFadden on your roster?
Yeah, I didn't see any reason to cut him. I thought he was still a great tackler. That's which is really valuable at that position. Maybe they felt he lost a step and was not going to be able to go down the field with people in terms of what they wanted. I can only assume that this is a change in strategy, a change in philosophy and what they want their corners to do. McFadden is not necessarily there where, if you have him in run support and you have him clean up underneath, he's superb at it. If you want him going down the field with people or playing heavy man, maybe they felt he wasn't what they wanted.
And we'll get into more detail on that with Pick 6, a later segment where that is a topic in the question that we picked for one of our listeners to win a 6-pack of beer from Something in the Water. But yeah, I agree with what you said there. And really, they cleaned out the defensive backfield. There's just not a lot of guys left. There's 2 corners left on the roster in Benji Franklin and Leonard Johnson. And that's basically like, now to be fair, a lot of the other guys in the secondary can play corner and have played corner before in college, especially, but some in the CFL too. It's just it's an odd looking group there, and we'll talk about that as an area of concern in a minute. The other surprise to me was all of the backup tackles were cut. So Nick Amoa from Cal Davis, Darte Lee from Texas El Paso, and Dare Rosenthal from LSU. All of them were cut. Like I did not see that coming at all. Now, to be fair, I wasn't super impressed with any of their play in the preseason. It's not like one of them jumped out to me and I was like, oh, okay, well, this guy's obviously going to make the team. I was just surprised because you need a backup tackle. But I have to think at this point that the Argos coaches are looking at it and they're like, no one's jumping off the page. They're not necessarily impressing us. And the Canadians that we have back up at guard are just as good at playing tackle as these guys are. And so why keep extra Americans on the roster that we would just as soon play our Canadian guards at tackle where they played in U Sports and be just as happy with that, or take a guy like Ryan Hunter, for example, and move him over to tackle. So that's what I felt, is that they must have felt strongly that the guys they cut weren't as good at tackle as like Ryan Hunter and company, Vandal and all those guys that played McKellar, that all played tackle at the U Sports level. Is that your take on that too?
Yeah, I mean, I think they probably felt like, well, I think they clearly felt that they weren't players that were even projects, being really pretty, businesslike and tough about it is, we don't want to use a roster spot on somebody who we don't believe we can turn into, at the very least, a 2. And I think they probably felt that these were not players that they could turn into 2s. So better to churn and keep the players, because look, the roster is good. They are a respected organization. Teams would be looking at that roster to poach. And I think they probably went with, best available player and didn't worry about positional depth, just kept the guys that they felt potentially they could turn into something and not worry about how thin it left them at certain positions.
The other one that's interesting is they cut a lot of draft picks, which is something they haven't done over the last few years. They've held on to their guys. They not only cut a few draft picks from last year's class in this last cut down, but also this year's class. They cut their 2 5th-rounders, Jarrell Cummings, the DB from UBC, Afena Onyeka, the defensive lineman from Carleton, and their 6th-rounder, Justin Sambu from Baylor. All 3 guys ended up getting cut in this round. And again, it wasn't something that surprised me, in that none of those players particularly stood out in a way where I thought, well, this guy's definitely going to make the roster. It's just surprising to see the Argos doing this with draft picks, because typically that hasn't been something that they've sent guys back to school, which is what happened with Daniel Shin. He's going back to school for a year, but it's unusual to see this where they're cutting 3 draft picks. Now, the positive side of that is you look and say, well, is because their Canadian talent level is so high. They've got so many guys here. You can't have 35 Canadians on your roster. And so there's a way around that, is that you've got to cut guys that you just really don't have an answer on yet and keep the guys that you feel really good about. So that's maybe the positive way of looking at it. Not necessarily misses per se in the draft, but we'll see. We'll see if these guys get picked up, and if they end up having long CFL careers. We'll come back to this, obviously, but the Argos have been pretty good at decision-making when it comes to Canadian talent for several years now. All right, let's get into our roster concerns. So number 1 for me is backup tackle. We just talked about those guys that are released. So what's the plan, JB? They're coming into this week. I felt really strongly, as soon as all the cutdowns were made last week, Saturday night, all the cutdowns were made. It's not really last week. I guess it's like 3 days ago. They were all made. And I felt very strongly Sunday or Monday morning, I would be reading that the Argos had signed a backup tackle that somebody had let go, and instead silence. So what's the plan this week? What's the depth chart going to look like? What if a tackle goes down in Sunday's game? Who's filling in? Like, what's the answer? Are you comfortable with this scenario?
I mean, it is unusual.
It's really unusual.
Oh yeah. I mean, I mean, they must have really not liked what they had.
I know that's,
I don't know what else to say. I mean,
but that's a bit of a failing too, though,
due
right?
respect is, that they wanted to essentially look on this team. There's a level that we expect you to be at to be on this team, and we're a championship aspiring team. And essentially, you don't match it. And so, you can't, like we've talked about on offensive line, the no donkey rule. Um, you just cannot have a gap in the chain. You can't hide somebody. So essentially, I guess they're saying, if we have to put one of our other starters in at an odd position, that's still better than having somebody who can simply not hold up to pressure.
And I think this is something that needs to be addressed though at some point, because I think you can roll into week one like this and you can have your plan of, sliding guys over, maybe having Hunter play tackle, whatever it is.
Yeah, you can
But
probably get to your first bye week.
yeah, and that's week two. So, I think that's obviously the plan here, but you can't go on all season like this unless you're deciding that that you're going to take a very different direction. If someone goes down, that we're dressing 4 Canadian linemen, are the structure of our team's going to change? That's a pretty dramatic move, and I'm not sure we've seen that yet.
I mean, I certainly, on occasion, I hate to bring my examples in, but I've had depth charts where the names on the depth chart are other players on the field,
Yeah.
not people on the bench. So if this person goes down, this person is going in, and this person is going in. It becomes a bit of a cannibalization rather than a depth chart.
Yeah, it's not ideal, but that's the position they might be
Yeah.
in right now. And you just have to hope they stay healthy week one and can get this situation sorted out. It would be worse to not have a starting tackle, obviously, like to not have anyone you felt comfortable with. The Argos are not at all in that position. They've got 5 great O linemen, but and a couple great backup guards too. Even I think a pretty good backup center situation. So it's just that tackle position.
And to be honest, I think they probably feel like they'd rather just do it in one fell swoop instead of one, kind of churning over the room. Like, we don't feel these guys are a fit. Let's just start again with a new group instead of one by one by one.
I think by the next time we are doing a pregame walkthrough episode, which is, it's after the bye week, I think they will have signed at least one more American tackle. That would be my guess. But again, I thought it'd be done Sunday and I thought it'd be done Monday. So they keep proving me wrong, which isn't new. If you are a new listener to this podcast, that happens a lot. The other position of concern, so corner. I'm not really worried about the halfback position, the safety position. I think they've got a lot of answers there. At corner, like right now, and this is a question we got asked a lot this week, is who's starting at corner? Because it's 2 guys that we weren't necessarily counting on. It was, 2 guys that I didn't have starting on any of the depth charts that I've made this year. So you're going to have probably Leonard Johnson at one spot, newly acquired Leonard Johnson. Well, I guess he signed in the fall of last year. But yeah, Leonard Johnson at one spot and Benji Franklin at the other spot. Both good corners. Leonard Johnson, let's talk about him a little bit because I think a lot of people probably haven't had a chance to see him play yet. Benji Franklin was on the roster last year and got a start down the stretch. And so I think there's a bit more familiarity there. But I'm going to give you a lot of credit here, JB, because he was the first guy that you pointed out when we were watching scrimmage at the Argo scrimmage in Guelph. When I was asking you, like, who jumped out on defense, I was looking at the offensive guys, and the first name you said was Leonard Johnson, and he really impressed you. What stands out, like, enough to say, you know what? Forget McFadden and Carnell and all these guys that we've had around. Leonard Johnson's going to be our guy.
Yeah, I mean, he looked fast. He looked twitchy. He looked, he put his. I didn't, like he made some tackles, willing to, to come up and clean up. He was on top of receivers. He did not have a ton of playing time, but he just was around the ball. Like I think, like he was not letting guys catch in front and then cleaning up, which sometimes sometimes players do, especially when new. They'd rather make the tackle than risk. And I felt like he was really good at running on top of receivers and getting a hand in, and looked pretty twitchy. Looked like maybe if you wanted to go some more man. I mean, it'd be really interesting to watch how much man they play. But he looked like somebody who you might be able to play some man with.
You're taking a lot of my answers from our Pick Six segment, but that's okay. It just means we're thinking along the same lines, and we aren't always. Like we're on the same page most of the time, but not usually when we talk about defensive players. But I agree with you there. I really like him, but he's not. I don't think he's ever played with the ones that we've seen. So it's a pretty big leap, but they obviously felt really good about him. Let's look at the last position, I guess, if we're going to sort of say concerns. And just one last thing at corner. If someone goes down a corner, Franklin Johnson goes down a corner, I think Mason Pierce is probably the guy that slides over. They've got other answers at halfback. He was a really good corner in college. He can do it. Most of those other guys, as I said, have played corner. So there are a lot of answers in there, but not ideal depth for just sort of specifically corners. And, you wonder if someone might be signed, maybe, a veteran guy like, Robertson Daniel or something like that signed, or just that they're going to start shuffling through and bringing some new guys in, maybe some recent NFL cuts who have not heard back, whose agents aren't having their phone ring off the hook or anything like that. So we'll see. The last position of concern, American receiver. It's not a huge concern. I was surprised that they let go of both BJ Bird and Jordan Bird. That I thought one of the two of them would probably stay, but I do actually kind of like they have a couple answers, guys that are on the practice squad, even that I think are interesting. Like Justin Marshall, I was really impressed with. He was signed to the practice squad. Makai Polk, I like Makai Polk's route running a lot. Just we didn't get to see him with the ball in his hands too much, but watching his routes, watching his separation that he's able to get in the few snaps that he was in there, he had some problems too, some mistakes. I think he had a drop in there as well. But probably a Brian Scott throne drop, because that was the theme of preseason. But they have guys there, but it's not necessarily the most experienced room behind DeMonte Coxie and DeVaris Daniels. Hey,
shout out Brian Scott holding down that third position.
Yeah, and as he should. Like we kind of felt like he did enough, and all three of those guys. I think they got that right. I would like to see, and I'm hoping. That they're able to maybe bring back John Matoka at some point. I would love to have another look at that guy. We barely saw him. And so a guy that I wouldn't mind them signing to the practice squad if there's nothing else out there for him. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. All right, let's move on to offensive and defensive MVPs for this team and how we see that this year. I found this a really tough exercise for both sides of the ball. Maybe I'll go first, JB, and then I'll give you a second crack at it. So Argos offensive MVP, I actually think this is going to be Kadeem Carey. I think there's a few different ways you can go here. You can look at DeVaris and Coxie. Really, it probably should be one of the offensive linemen. All five of those guys are so good. They deserve being in the conversation, but that just never happens. That's not how people view teams and offensive linemen. And so I think people would be annoyed if I went with Dejon Allen, for example, although I do think that might be the right answer. And so
they're never giving it to an offensive lineman.
And it's this is not really a thing anyway. This is just sort of us, but Kadeem Carey, I think, is going to be my answer. I think he's going to have a really nice comeback season and prove everyone in the CFL that he's still got it. So that's my answer on, where are you going for offense?
Yeah. I mean, I think he has to be, if they are going to be successful, he is the answer. So I think if you're right, then the Argos probably are able to be 5-4 in these first 9. So I think that's a positive choice. I'm gonna go with wide receiver. I'm gonna go. I think DeVaris is gonna have a really big year.
Yeah, I see that too. I think he looks really good right now. I think he's running really well. Yeah,
I think, look, I sometimes ride him for disappearing, but I think he is somebody that they're going to look to, especially when they have some young quarterbacks in there, and a veteran receiver with the hands that he has. I think is going to be somebody that the quarterbacks are gonna rely on. And I think, yeah, I just think he has huge games, but never overwhelming seasons. And I think this is the year for him to put it all together and to be one of the elite receivers.
And I actually really like him meshing with Dukes because one thing I think Tavares does very well is stuff that's off script. Like when things start to break down or the play sort of changes in its set, that's where I think Tavares has really nice instincts and is great at finding space. And you can see all those plays where Cameron Dukes breaks the pocket, ends up scrambling, rolling, looking for action.
As long as Dukes doesn't get him killed.
I know, but he's got to
really
be
the
careful
only-
of that. Like Tavares has taken some shots over the years. A few stand out, and we got to make sure he's protected because we've already talked about that this preseason.
Yeah,
But
I like Daniels.
yeah, he's good, and he's good at finding space. Defensive side of the ball, I'll start with this one.
Mm-hmm.
So my answer, again, there's a lot of guys, like shout out to Wyndham McManus, of course. There's everyone on the defensive line, Serezna, Oakman, Brinkman. There's so many answers here. I'm going to go with Flo Aromalade. The reason I like Flo, he had a great year last year. He was so dangerous, so difficult to block. And now he's probably going to be lining up to Jake Serezna most of the time next to him. Like one of the two of them is getting a double team, and you're not going to let that be Flo and leave Serezna one-on-one all the time because he's closer to the quarterback and is maybe more of a threat there. There's less you can escape from. And so I think you're going to get a ton of one-on-ones with Flo with no help whatsoever. And I think he's just going to scorch guys. Serezna's going to put up good numbers too, because the nice thing about that combo, they're both speed guys, and they're both like they really are both edge guys. Although Serezna's got a lot more mass, he can play inside. He will be an inside guy. But because of that outside experience, you can run great twists with them because you know that Serezna on that twist is still going to have the discipline to hold down the edge, which you don't always feel. You don't want to do it as much with guys like Brinkman, who's an outstanding player, but that's not his game. A guy like Serezna, Oakman too, like you can send those guys around the edge on twists. So that's just going to help open up things for Arimolade and the D tackles. And I think he's going to put up a huge year in terms of sacks. He probably gets that nod for the Argos on D.
D was a little harder for me because I think the answer probably much like LeBron in his prime, when really the answer is always LeBron, but maybe you debate other guys to keep it interesting. I think Wyndham McManus is the defensive MVP of this team. This team will go as he goes. He is the enforcer. He is the heart of it. He is the center of it. So I think, realistically he is, but that's a bit boring to choose him, I think. So for me, I came down to two. I think, much like you, with the depth on that defensive line, I think Robbie Smith is going to get a ton of looks. I think he's going to not be circled because you can't circle everybody on the chart when you're prepping. And I think he's going to get a lot of looks. I think you're going to have a lot of guys being double teamed. He's going to get a lot of chances to rack up sacks, which, certainly everybody loves when trying to come up with MVPs. So I really like Robbie Smith. If I had to pick a dark horse, maybe Quincy at defensive back. I think they're going to use him a lot. I think he's going to be kind of Pickett.
Yeah, I see that too. Like Quincy Mojet, if you haven't seen him play yet, you probably saw him in BC last year, maybe a game or two. He's so much fun to watch, and he can play that safety spot too, which makes possibilities. We loved how Pickett was versatile that way. They could do anything with him. They could send him. They could drop him into deep half. You can do that with Quincy Mojet as well. And I love that's an exciting pick. I don't think he's going to necessarily stand out as the best player on the D because there's so many great guys that we've already named. But that's a fun pick because he may look something like Adarius Pickett looked last year. So yeah, I can't wait to watch him play. And Robbie Smith, he's had a terrific camp and preseason. It just looks like he's got. I hate the best shape of his life kind of preseason talk.
Look,
but he does look good.
His first step at camp looked
really good.
Looked elite.
Yeah,
honestly, it looked elite. It looked American.
Yeah, which I don't think you mean that in a negative way, but
well, what greater compliment can one give? I think.
yeah, I don't know about that.
All right.
Let's get into our next segment. So the top 50, TSN every year puts out their top 50 players it's got to be players that are on this year's CFL rosters, players that we're looking forward to in 2024. I'm one of the, Dave Naylor called us experts. I'm one of the experts on this panel. I've probably just taken down the value of the word expert by telling you that. But this is really hard. It's my second year being a part of this. And what I was, my picks are hit and miss when I look at what everyone has. And I look at my last year's roster too, and I'm all over the place. I got guys that disappeared like right from the word go. And then other guys that were amazing that I had, ranked in the late 30s. And so, it's really tough. But at the end of the day, they had 6 Argos. I ended up with 7 Argos on my list. I thought it was pretty fair. They were mostly around the place that I had them as well. So there was nobody. I thought the Argos might get shut out initially because they count down from 50 to 1, and there was nobody in the top 25 or the bottom 25, I guess, like 50 to 25. But then the Argos started falling in. And so you had Ryan Hunter at 23, Jake Serezna 17, Dejan Allen at 12, Flo Romolade at 10, Wynton McManus at 8, and Chad Kelly at 5. And so when you look at that list of 6, really, I only felt like there was one, possibly 2 guys they were missing. We're the experts. I'm using finger quotes for those just listening and not watching. The experts were asked to only submit top 40. And so I actually had 2 other guys in my top 50, one other guy in my top 40. I had Devaris Daniels at 36, and he did not make the list. And I also had Peter Nicastro in at 41, and he was not on the list either. And so, actually, no, I don't think I have that number right, but I had Peter Nicastro somewhere in there. Anyone else that you think we're missing, or you think that's fair? Like Winnipeg had 10, Toronto had 6, most of the other teams had 6 except Ottawa, and I think we had 3.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think there are a couple of players who I think will probably be on there come the end of the season, but you wouldn't put them on right now. But I do think a couple of players that they've added this offseason are going to explode in Toronto, which has been the case for a number of players over the last couple of years. So I do think there's a couple of guys that will get added, but aren't ready quite to be there. And, like for Daniels, he is a top 10 receiver. He just isn't a top 10 receiver 18 times.
Yeah. It doesn't. The consistency isn't necessarily there, but maybe it will be this year, as he's going to be the guy that Dukes is probably going to lean on, right? All right, JB, it is time to debut our newest segment. This is called Pick 6, and this is made possible by Something in the Water Brewing. Every week, we are going to be giving away a 6-pack of delicious beer from Something in the Water Brewing. We're going to get you to send in questions, and we will pick one of your questions to answer on the show. And if we pick your question, then you go down to Something in the Water. We'll send them your name and show some ID that is you, and off you go. You've got your 6-pack, and you can bring it on down to part of the tailgate pregame if you're doing that this week. Our winner this week is TT. And so TT, we will be in touch with you to get your particulars. And his question, I thought, it's one that we've talked about a lot already, but I've saved some content. But I just think it was a really well-worded question because it's got some different elements to it. So I'll read you his question. Why do you think McFadden was cut? He was a healthy scratch once or twice last year and was sent on the road to Montreal during the preseason. So clearly the coaches haven't had total faith in him. As a casual onlooker, his play looked fine to me. What part of his game was lacking? And so if I can go first here, JB, I want to build off something that you said. You suggested maybe he'd lost a step. Let's remember that Tavares McFadden, what made him and still makes him a very good corner. And again, to be clear, I would have kept him on the team based on what I've seen. I'm not privy to meetings and I don't get to see every minute of every practice every day. And so I don't know as much. But he still looked pretty good to me. He was never a fast DB. He was never a quick change of direction guy. He's a very good zone corner, an excellent zone corner, I think. And like you highlighted, he's a good tackler, loves coming up to disrupt things, those quick screens. He will get involved in the run game, but you're kind of limited. And it didn't matter with Corey Mace and his system. It actually hasn't mattered with the last few defensive coordinators the Argos have had, because they've played so much cover 4 and cover 2, where those DBs are in the flats and you're sending a safety. That works perfectly well with his style of game. You mentioned in that first segment, if they're looking to play more man, I think that's exactly it. I look at the guys they have here. Benji Franklin, he's a 4.3 guy, super fast. Johnson, not quite as fast as that, but he's significantly faster than McFadden. Maybe they are looking to be a little bit more diverse in what they do defensively, mixing in a lot more man, which the Argos really haven't played at all over the last 3 seasons. They just haven't played a lot of man. And so if that's what you're planning on, you look at McFadden and you say, well, isn't there some other use for him? He's not really a special teams guy, right? And so your backup corners, you can't have him really on the roster if he's not going to be a special team star. You want your backup corners to be special team stars. And so I think that's why he's not on the roster. JB, does that make sense to you? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that would be my theory. We're not privy to conversations sometimes when coaches leave. That can sometimes divide a room, or sometimes, players sort of want the old system run, and sometimes there's a conflict. So, I've seen that happen, with teams, that there's a guy who is not really as into the new program as the old program, and you make a decision to kind of have everybody pulling in the same direction. I have no idea if that happened here, but that's the only other rationale that could pop up.
Next up, JB, let's talk about this Chad Kelly situation. So some news broke today that the lawsuit that was filed by the former Toronto Argonauts strength and conditioning coach against Chad Kelly has been settled out of court. This has been confirmed by multiple sources. What do you make of it? What does this mean? Does this mean anything? Does this change anything for Chad Kelly or the Argos? Should it? How do you feel about this announcement, or this? I guess it's not an announcement. It's a breaking story.
Well, I mean, it means both sides have come to an agreement that makes them happy, or certainly the plaintiff feels that they have received what was a fair compensation for what they experienced. And so I think it's a good thing that this has been settled, and settled to everybody's liking, and now we move forward.
Yeah, and I guess that's it. And I don't know if this is going to result in appeals or anything like that, but I think it probably means that this is talked about a bit less, and for better or worse. And I think that probably from the Argos standpoint, certainly for players around practice and everything else, I think they would like to focus on football. The guys that are there at camp and that are practicing daily. I don't think they would have wanted this looming and continuing on. And so from that standpoint, if you're looking at this purely from a football standpoint, I'm sure there's a bit of relief in that room, because of the fact that these guys that, weren't involved in this and had nothing to do with this can get on with football and so forth. All right, JB, let's get into my favorite segment, your favorite segment. It's time for OCDC. For OCDC, if you're new to the show, OCDC is a segment where I give you my offensive plan for both teams in this week's game. JB gives you his defensive plan for both teams in this week's game. JB has a long history as a defensive coordinator in coaching football. Mine is on the offensive side of the ball. And so we are bringing you our best. And this is how we see the BC Lions, the Toronto Argonauts game planning for this week, or at least how we would do it. Do you want the honors, JB, or do you want me to go first?
No, you can go ahead.
All right, we'll start with the BC Lions. So I will go with the BC Lions offense. So I think number one above all else, test the corners early. We spent a lot of time in the show talking about, you've got these new guys at corner. You've got a little bit of film on Benji Franklin. We don't know much about Johnson, probably. You're going to look at his Duke tape, his New York Giants stuff. But for the most part, you just got to put them in situations. And so it's not just like one-on-one situations. You're putting them in communication situations. And so you're challenging them, you're putting them in conflict. You're running concepts like Ohio, dagger, smash that are really relying on that communication between a corner and halfback and seeing how he responds. You're also looking to put him under stress by rolling. You run floods and roll out with it and see what depth he's at, where that particular corner to that side is defending, and see if you can take advantage of things that way. The other side of this is that there's some concern for me as BC's OC. I'm worried about the Toronto pass rush, and so I'm going to try and slow it down. So the other part of my game plan is going to be draws, screens, quick hitters. I might even see if we can go no huddle in certain series, like when the heavies get out there, when you've got the Brinkman package out there and you're going with heavy pass rush for Toronto. Maybe you just try and go up tempo here and keep those guys on the field for multiple plays in a row just to slow down that pass rush. So that is my plan for offense for the BC Lions. JB, for the BC Lions, what is your defensive plan?
Well, my defensive plan will be similar to what Montreal ran. I'm going to fill the box. I'm going to bring a lot of heat. I'm going to play a lot of cover zero. I'm going to force Dukes to show me that, I'm going to force him to get me out of man. I'm going to play man. I'm going to bring heat. I'm going to fill the box. We're not going to let him scramble. We're not going to let Carey get any runs going. We're going to make him beat us one-on-one down the field with throws. And I just don't, as the BC defensive coordinator, I'll throw in a couple of different looks to try and catch him off guard. But primarily, I'm going to spend that first quarter daring him to make me play more conservatively.
I'm excited about seeing how that goes. I think that's exactly what we're going to see, because I thought Montreal clearly came in with that plan. It worked fairly well until it goes off script. Like if you're playing that style, you're playing a lot of zero, you better get there, right? Because if Dukes escapes and you're in zero, there's trouble. Either from him running because everyone's got their back to the quarterback, they can't see he's taken off, or zero's just tough to stay with a receiver for that long, and receiver has time for a double move or something like that. Dukes escapes the pockets. You have a chance for big plays, and that'll be the challenge for BC if they're running that, and I think they will. Can they hold it down and be disciplined in their rush? Let's switch to the good guys, JB. Looking at the Toronto Argonauts offense, what I want to see in that first series, I want to see a deep seam or a deep sideline to the boundary side. I don't really care if it's incomplete or complete. I need them to back everybody up because, like you said, I think that's going to be the plan. Give DBs reason to think they might get beat deep. I've seen it time and time again. When you do something in the first series of the game, it sticks with DBs for a long time. And if you go deep on that first play, especially if it's complete, but even if it's not, you're going to get a little bit of hesitation. They're not going to creep up quite as close. It's just something that naturally occurs because no DB in week one of the season wants to get beat deep on a long ball. And that's going to buy Dukes a little bit more time. He's going to buy the receivers a little bit more space for the underneath stuff that he's really good at. So that's plan number one. Number two, they got to get creative in the running game. So they got to use Carey on outside zones, which we really like him running. But they've also got to counter off that, both with Carey running counters, but also sending it the other way from the R position, either Bailey or Matal, any of those guys. And I wouldn't even mind them. I'm not a big fan of this generally, but I wouldn't mind them getting Spencer Nichols out there a lot in that tight end set. And running out of run heavy pass situations, run heavy formations, and then capitalizing on that with play action and getting Dukes out of the pocket, rolling, looking for guys off heavy play action, short routes where he could also keep it himself. So that is my plan for the Toronto offense. What is your Toronto defense going to do, JB?
Well, I think that the Toronto defense definitely, this is where that defensive line has got to earn their money. Is they're going to need to win some one-on-ones. They're going to need to turn that clock in Vernon Adams' head. Because if he has time, then they're in deep trouble. My focus, I get similar in some ways to Toronto, is my focus is the run. I think BC is excited with their new tool, Stanback. They did not run the ball that successfully last year. I think that they are going to look to run the ball, and I want to take away those free first downs that Vernon Adams always gets when he breaks contain. So it has to be disciplined. You have to have contain. It can't just be everybody chasing the quarterback like an all-star game. So you have to have contain, but you have to take something away from BC. They are explosive, and I think taking the run and taking Vernon Adams scrambling away is the way to do it. And if they throw for 400 yards, I don't care. You can throw for 400 yards and still lose the game. So I'm looking to take away the run. Priority one, take away the run. I think that that's what we're good at. I think that that's what they can do and force Vernon Adams to make quick decisions in the pocket. That has always been the key to defeating him, and that I hope that they're able to continue that, because I think BC, if they can run, and now you're guessing at what, now you're in trouble, because now they're just going to eat you alive. So you have to take one of those tools away. And for me, it's the run and the scramble. I think that has to be the focus, and you'll have to live with giving up passing yards. Bend but don't break.
I love watching Vernon Adams play football. He's always exciting. Even when the games don't go well, like last year at BMO Field, he threw 6 picks. But if you take those 6 picks away, he had some amazing highlights. Like he does awesome things. He's so much fun to watch. And they were still in it for a little bit, even though all these interceptions kept coming. Do you view is this a negative or a positive that he's coming back to the place where he threw 6 interceptions? Like, is it in his head, or is he looking to redeem himself from that, you think?
I don't know if anybody remembers, to be honest.
He remembers.
Yeah, I think he remembers. I think he would like to play better. I think that he, I think it's the opening game of the season. Of course, they'd love to come into Toronto and ruin the home opener. He'd like to be better. I don't think they need 6 interceptions from him. You just cannot give him those free conversions on the 5-6 yard runs to keep drives going. They just cannot have that. They have to force him to take them apart surgically.
It is time for one thing, JB. One thing that we want to see this week from the Toronto Argonauts. For me, this is easy and it ties into what I said before, but it's deep passes. And so my one thing, what I want to see is I want to see one completed pass with over 30 air yards. So the ball traveling in the air for more than 30 yards completed. I think it doesn't sound like too much to ask, I don't think, but I think that that's a really big key, because if you can't complete a ball that travels 30 yards in the air, you're not giving, not just for this week, but going forward, they're going to keep stacking that box. They're going to keep pressing. You're going to keep having everybody within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage at the snap if you can't do that. And I think it's the area that I'm concerned about most. And so if they can do that, especially early on in the game, I think that's going to bode really well for the Argos offense and for Cam Dukes as well. What's your one thing, JB?
I would want a defensive touchdown. I think that the team is going to need special teams and the defense to contribute to the scoring, especially in the first couple of weeks. And I know the defense is going to have to, honestly, it's going to have to gamble. It's going to have to play more aggressively than it would normally, because you can't just play smart ball because your team's going to put up 30, and at the end of the day, we're probably going to win. You're going to need to play a little more aggressively, go for sacks instead of making the tackle, jump underneath routes instead of making the clean hit. I don't see any other choice. I think the defense is going to have to go hunting for the ball. So I'm looking for a defensive touchdown.
And predictions. Who's going to win? How does this one end? Do you want the honors in this? You want me to go first?
I can take the honors.
All right, you got it.
I want to say Toronto. Look, my parents are coming to the home opener. I'm excited for the home opener. I cannot say Toronto. I think the BC Lions are too good for Toronto without Chad Kelly. I think BC ends up on top 27-14.
27-14. So you don't even have it close, eh?
I think Toronto's going to have a hard time moving the ball.
I hope you didn't tell your parents that before they bought the tickets.
I did
Yeah,
not.
just so you know, mom and dad.
I did not.
That's great that they're in town. They're going to go and see the Argos game. They're going to have a great time. It's such a good environment. They'll have a good time, even if your result comes true. I don't see it going that way, honestly. When I first started thinking about this, I did. When I first just sort of preseason, I'm thinking, okay, how is this going to break down? I think it's going to be a bit of a rough start. But I look back at what Coach Dinwiddie has done in home openers and season openers and just sort of look at, what's gone on here. If you look at the last three, well, his only three home openers as a head coach, he's been really successful. So go back to 2021. He's got Nick Arbuckle at quarterback, and they defeat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers 30-23 as 7-point underdogs. And, we didn't really know much at the time about what we were seeing, what we were looking at. Winnipeg went on to win the Grey Cup that year. They had a great record, but that loss was Nick Arbuckle and Ryan Dinwiddie with the home opener at BMO Field. Fast forward to the next year, 2022. Now it's McLeod Bethel-Thompson at quarterback, and he defeats Montreal 20-19. They were slight favorites in that game, but still, it's a win over a playoff team in Montreal. And then last year, the home opener, Chad Kelly defeats Hamilton 32-14. They were underdogs in that game. They were 1.5 point underdogs in that game. So 2 out of his 3 home openers, he's been an underdog, and he's won all 3 of those home openers. Dinwiddie finds a way to get it done. And now for the 4th year in a row, his home opener is going to be with yet another different quarterback, his 4th different quarterback, and we'll see if he can continue that streak with Cameron Dukes. I think he's going to be able to. And so I'm going to give the Argos a narrow win, 22-20. 22-20, I should say. All right, JB, it is time for Put Me Down for 20. This, I know, is if it's not OCDC, this is your favorite segment.
Well, I would think my picks are my favorite, but yes.
Yes, that is definitely your actual favorite. But for those that are new to the show, Put Me Down for 20. We started last season. The premise of it is that we have 200 golden fleeces with which to wager. And every week we've got to put up 20 of those golden fleeces. It can be on multiple bets, but one of those bets needs to be Argos related and the other is non-Argos related. So typically we'll divide that into 10 and 10, but you can do whatever you want with it. Last year, I turned my 200 golden fleeces into 439.44 golden fleeces. And JB turned his golden fleeces into 0 golden fleeces. And so
it was a little. If we definitely had different strategies. You were a little more Knish, grinding out your rent.
I did. You went for the moon on every
I went
home
for
run
the
swing.
moon a lot. Yeah, that's how we're going this year.
All right, I like it. So let's get into it with our golden fleeces. So I'll give you mine first. I've got 2 wagers. So for 10, and actually, just before we even get into that, I just as a disclaimer, like, we are not professional gamblers and we have no business offering anybody any sort of gambling advice. So do not take anything that we say seriously, and always gamble responsibly. Never bet any more than you'd be happy to lose, is the cost of entertainment. And so, but especially at any time, but especially with advice coming from us, just as a disclaimer there. So for my wagers, I'm going to put 10 golden fleeces on the Argos money line. I've said already that I think they're going to win. Money line's pretty good. I've got it at plus 240. And so that will pay off handsomely if that comes through. And so that's 10 golden fleeces. And my other 10, I'm going to put on a long-term bet. I like the odds on this. The Saskatchewan Roughriders to win the Grey Cup is plus 1,100. I just think they're a much better team than that. And, those odds, I just think you can't say no to. So that's where 10 of my golden fleeces are going. I know you're the Riders guy, JB, but I'm stealing your strategy here with that wager. What are you doing with your golden fleeces?
I'm going to go BC. I'm going to go 5 on the Lions and Argos hitting the under at 47 is the under.
Very exciting. Everyone loves betting on the under.
Who doesn't love betting on a road favorites to hit the under? So that's a crowd pleaser in every way.
And your remaining 15 fleeces?
And my 15, I'm all in on Saskatchewan. They are underdogs to Edmonton. I think that's going to be a market correction. So I like Saskatchewan to win, and that's plus 110.
Beauty. All right. I got it down. Godspeed, JB. I hope your results are better than last year. I'm sure we're just going to flip because, again, I feel like you're going to end up with like 5,000 because all of those near misses are going to hit at like plus 840 that you had last year.
There were a couple of hard beats last year. I can't lie.
Let's get to our CFL picks to wrap this all up. So this you beat me in last year. It came down to the very last week. You beat me by 1, I believe, in the end. And I still owe you a flight of beer from Something in the Water Brewing. We'll have to take care of that soon. I think that'll be a summer thing, maybe, JB. But yeah, you came out on top here. And so I'm gonna make you pick first for this series. So first game is Montreal at Winnipeg. Where are you going? This is just straight up winners.
Yep. I have Winnipeg at home.
Yeah. And I will also choose Winnipeg in that one. I actually think this could be, I'm not knocking Montreal. I think Montreal is going to be there in the end. I think they're going to be a team to contend with. I think Winnipeg is going to come out on fire. That's not a fair, the Grey Cup champs. You send them on the road to Winnipeg to open the season. Yeah, congratulations, Alouettes. That's brutal. Like, it's just schedule making wise. You got to treat Montreal a little better than that. I think Winnipeg's going to come out on fire. Game 2, Hamilton at Calgary. This is not easy.
No, I'm gonna go. It's not actually. I'm going to go, even though I really dislike Calgary. I'm going to take Calgary at home, but I couldn't like that bet any less.
Yeah, and I feel the same way on the other side of it. I'm going to take Hamilton in that game on the road. And I just think the only thing I can see is that, they just acquired Jonathan Moxley. They got Moxley. They have Bo Levi Mitchell. I feel like the former Calgary Ghosts are going to come back to haunt the Stampeders. So I don't know if it'll be a pick six or a touchdown from one of those two guys.
I don't see any chance that game is not 15-15 with 3 minutes left in the fourth.
Sounds exciting. So we're different on that one. And the third one, Saskatchewan at Edmonton. Where are you going?
Yeah, Saskatchewan. I like them. I like them to come out. I feel the Elks are definitely improved. I'm excited for them, but I don't think that's going to be an improvement that you're going to see immediately. I think that's going to take some gelling.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think Saskatchewan wins that game. I think it's going to be a really good game, though. I like the Elks this year, so that could be fun. I just don't think they've learned how to win yet. We even saw that in the preseason game where they dominated Saskatchewan. They were up in like every category, but it was just continuous shooting themselves in the foot. They found a way to lose. Every single time they seem to do that. And so until they know how to win, I'm not going to be picking a lot of Elks wins, but it may happen sooner rather than later. And then the last game we already know. So that's BC at Toronto. I've got Toronto. You've got BC, and we are off and running for 2024. We hope to see you down at Something in the Water Brewing Sunday. Don't forget to head down there. Support sponsors that support football, CFL football, the Toronto Argonauts, and Something in the Water has been great with us. And if you get a chance, please meet us down there pregame. The game starts at 7:00. Also, make sure you tune in to find out who wins the tickets, Something in the Water's tickets, which we'll be drawing tomorrow. If you haven't yet entered, you still have time to do that. And enjoy some CFL football. It's all up and running in less than 48 hours from now. That will just about do it for us on this pregame walkthrough edition of the Xs and Argos podcast. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe.